Joey, today we're going to be interviewing Chad Arnold. He's actually someone that's in our Inner Circle Plus mastermind. And his interview reminds me of a quote from Sharon Srivatsa. And Sharon says, the greatest way to building wealth is through owning an operating company. The greatest way to building wealth is through owning an operating company. Let me tell you why that's so important for us to be focusing on as we go through this podcast interview with Chad. Is you take $100,000 and you go and invest it. And it doesn't matter if it is in the stock market, which we hate, it's in real estate or land or any sort of thing that you've heard us talk about on the podcast. In a 1, 2, 3 year opportunity, what is the hope for that 100,000? Is it to double? Oh, that'd be amazing. 100% return. Oh, if it did it over 3 years, well, I have like a 25 to 30% annual rate of return.
Right.
Dave Ramsey is foaming at the mouth for that, right? In an operating company, we've already seen it over and over again where someone took as little as $100,000 and within 3 years has a company worth $10 million, right? $5 million, $50 million. We've seen all of these examples, and that's why that quote is so accurate. The greatest way to building wealth is through owning an operating company. In today's podcast, we're going to break down for you some of the things that Chad and his wife, Tori, were able to do to create an operating company. But Joey, they weren't natural entrepreneurs, were they?
Oh, no. And that's what I think that is so great about today's interview that you're going to pick up is maybe you've been in that position where you're like, man, I get what Russ is saying. I love the idea of an operating company, but it's just, there's too many hurdles in my brain. Like I just don't feel equipped. I don't feel like I have the systems and the processes and the ability to hire and fire and manage and all those things. It just seems overwhelming. Man, he's talking to us about taking calculated risks, right? Exactly where you're at right now. He's been there and he took the calculated risk, learning while doing the actual franchise. And by the way, it helped to have all those processes and things laid out. And then lastly, how to scale a business to become more hands-free. These are the things you're going to pick up from this interview with Chad. And if you're on that line where you're like, man, I just don't know, I want this operating company, this is the interview for you. And let's not hold anything more back from this interview with Chad Arnold. Let's jump in right now.
Welcome to the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast, your guide to understanding how to get out of the Wall Street rat race and start your own mailbox money lifestyle. Now, don't let these handsome Southern draws fool you. These financial minds are teaching our country to enhance savings, increase cash flow, and create passive income, all without the help of Wall Street. Are you ready to break through? Now here are your hosts, Russ Morgan and Joey Murray.
Wealth Without Wall Street Tribe, so excited to introduce you, Mr. Chad Arnold, Inner Circle Plus member and friend of the show. Chad, so glad to have you.
Thanks for having me, guys. Excited to be here.
Man, if you would, just take us back to the moment. It's been a couple of years now where you and your wife are sitting in the store. It's 5 a.m. and it's day one. Talk to me a little bit about what the emotions were like and what the rest of that day, how it turned out.
Man, Russ, you trying to get me crying right out of the gate?
Yeah, man.
Just put you right on the spot.
Yeah, I thought we were going to be talking about my banking policies. Yeah, so this was January 30th of 2021. My wife and I got this crazy idea of starting a coffee shop. It's called Summer Moon here in Oklahoma City. The store opened, it's a Saturday, so the store opened at 7 a.m. We'd been plugging it, didn't know what was going to happen. It was cold. So I remember my wife and I were driving. It's like 5 a.m. We're driving to the store. It's raining outside. So we're like, oh no, nobody's going to be there. We've spent all this money. We've guaranteed this SBA loan. We've guaranteed this lease, just lots of emotions. So we get there, we turn the lights on, we start setting up, and like literally at like 5:20, we see two people sitting outside in the rain. And that was a shock to us. And it ended up lining. We opened at 7, but the line was wrapped like all the way around the building, probably like 200-300 feet. I mean, we had a line to the door all day long. We broke records with our drive-through and in the lobby. And so after that, we didn't think we were going to be opening multiple stores, but after that went so well, that's when we were like, all right, we've done this. That was really hard, but now we know what to do. Let's do it again.
That's so awesome.
Amazing.
All right, so I do want to take people. I know we just jumped right into that moment, but man, I feel like hearing that story, and I've heard you share it once before, just like all of those opportunities and all of the things that you thought, man, this could go bad, right? And the internal head trash we have did you come out of like having entrepreneur family? Like, did you know that, hey, I know that it can be rough, but we're going to have success because I've seen this modeled so many times in my life? Or talk a little bit about your background.
Yeah, no, I grew up in Mustang, Oklahoma, just a suburb of Oklahoma City. So my mom's an attorney, family lawyer, but she's done well, but she's looked at it more of like a ministry. It was never like this huge profit machine for her. She did well. My dad was in sales, so he's always worked for a company. In fact, they thought we were a little bit crazy when we told them, what we were planning on doing. So definitely, we didn't see that growing up, like this entrepreneurial spirit.
Well, but you had done something that wasn't always franchises before that. What was your kind of work history up to that point?
Out of college, I worked in finance at an oil and gas company here in Oklahoma City. I was an analyst. And then I did not like being at a desk all day, but I had a great job. And then I decided I was going to go sell mortgages, which I think, Joey, you used to do that as well. So I went and sold mortgages, and my parents thought I was crazy when I did that. And then I ended up working for a developer, my dad's friend. And that's ultimately what led us to finding this site. It was one of his property.
So talk about that. I mean, I think the person listening right now who maybe says, hey, I don't like working my desk job, but that's just all I know because that's what I went to school for. Like you went and got a finance degree and they just stayed in that, industry that they were educated in. What were some of those things? How did you stumble upon this? And what were some of those early steps that confirmed that you guys were making the right decision?
Basically what happened was we had this new development, new retail center right on the corner of the turnpike and a highway, great visibility. And so in college, I would go to Starbucks at like 5:30, right when they opened every morning. And I would do my homework, do a Bible study. I always loved Starbucks and I just loved being there. Well, I was responsible for leasing that property. And I remember I was just hounding Starbucks, like, please come to the site, please come to the site. So finally got their attention. I mean, I worked literally a year and a half getting them there. And we got an LOI signed, a letter of intent, and we thought it was going to happen. The lease was out for signatures, and they ended up backing out because there wasn't a signal to that development. There was a signal like, I don't know, a couple blocks down. So the Department of Transportation said, no signal here. So Starbucks backed out of it. And I remember talking to my wife, like when we were drafting the lease, I was like, this is so cool. Like, how full circle is this? Like, I was studying in college at Starbucks, and now I'm about to do a deal with Starbucks. Like, I was over the moon happy. And so whenever we found out the lease wasn't going to happen, I was pretty deflated. My brother called me. He was like, hey, there's this place called Summer Moon in Houston. It's right by my house. It's amazing. You should call them. And I was like, okay, I'll call them. So I shot them an email. I was like, hey, any interest in OKC? And they responded like, yeah, we'd love to. Do you want to be the franchisee? And I was like, no, like I was hoping you'd open a corporate store here. So then I get home and I remember talking to Tori on my back porch, and she's like, let's do it. Why don't we do that? And that's kind of how it all came and went. And we didn't have a clue what we were doing. But the whole time, our prayer was like, hey, Lord, just open doors that need to be opened. And then if we don't need to do this, just slam this in our face shut. And every step we took, the doors just kept opening. And I think that's kind of the message to those that maybe are watching this and like, hey, I don't like my desk job, but I want to do something. Well, it's not I think in life we can force stuff. Like we can just search best franchises in the nation and force ourselves into a model. But the fact is, we were not looking for anything. We knew we wanted more in our life, but we didn't know what that looked like. And it, like, God's provision, it kind of just fell in our lap. And us, and another thing. So it's like, I thought that doing the deal with Starbucks was full circle, right? But it's like God had so much bigger plans for Tori and I, and it just worked out amazing. And then on top of that, Tori's never liked coffee. And I've always told her, like, hey, like, you would be the perfect woman if you and I could go to a coffee shop and drink a latte together and just hang out. And now she owns a coffee shop. It's pretty funny. And she actually drinks the coffee. She likes it that much. She's got to put a little sugar, a little honey in there, but probably the Russ method over the Joey method. But
That's right. That's right. All right. So if you didn't already love him because he sold mortgages, I mean, let's just
Yeah.
say that really special people have sold mortgages. Just going to put that out there. I want to pick something out that maybe most people would miss. Talk about how powerful it is for you and your spouse to be aligned with something right out of the gate like this. Like when you talk to your wife and she says, let's do it. Like, what does that do to your marriage and to you as a man, like hearing your wife say that? Like, I have experience like that, but I would love to hear yours before we get to some of the more nitty gritty about the actual franchise.
yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing. That's probably one of my favorite things about her is, like, I think a lot of times you have couples, like, one is super loves risk and the other does not. But I would argue she's not as risky as me, but she's close to it. And I think the whole attitude is like, all right, if we fail, we'll learn from it, and and we tell each other, it's like, all right, if we go bankrupt next week, like, all right, we'll get back up and we'll go again. We'll figure it out. It's just part of it. It's kind of hate to say it, but it's kind of a big game, and try not to get too emotional about it. And another example is, I was talking to the Land Geek because y'all plugged them, and I called them and they're like, yeah, it's going to be X amount of dollars. And I mean, it's a lot, but what you get, it's definitely worth it. And I remember calling her being like, I don't know if she's going to go for this. And I called her. She's like, yeah, go for it. I'm like, wow, like, that's amazing. Where most couples, it's probably like this conflict. And so that's just never been the case with us, thankfully.
Well, I know that both of your backgrounds come from competitive sports, right? I think you play golf. Is that correct?
Yeah. And she played volleyball.
And play volleyball. Yeah. So that competitive nature, I think you probably utilized that a lot throughout your work history, but also just all things, right? We have to improve. We know that we're going to require coaching. It's going to require us to continue to learn from the mistakes that we make. I think that being competitive is the thing that maybe is the common bond that entrepreneurs have, even though that you guys wouldn't have probably saw yourself early on, as you said, as entrepreneurs.
Right.
I would love for us to get into this a little deeper, because for the person listening who maybe has thought about franchise as an option, we've had several conversations with people who are in the franchise space on the show in the past. I'd love to know maybe some of those biggest lessons that you've learned after becoming a franchisee, right? So some of the things, one, you had to do in order to get there, and some of the things that you did, right? Like that has helped you become successful. And then maybe we could have some of those, like, here's a lesson that, looking back on it now that I'm opening more stores and understanding more about it, I probably would have done this differently, or I would know that this would have happened and been more prepared for it. So let's start from the very beginning. Like, what were some of the early things that you had to do and boxes you had to check off in order to move forward with Somerville?
Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest one for me was Tesla. They came out with the Model 3. I forget when it came out, but they announced it, and typical Elon fashion, it took like 4 years to arrive. But I was on the waiting list out of the gate, and I got the car, and y'all are like, where are you going with this? So I got the car and I loved it. It was my favorite car I've ever had. But whenever we were like, hey, we're going to do this franchise thing, it was like, all right, we got to sell the Tesla, which is like, hindsight, I'm so glad I did. But to me, it was like, man, I'm making a sacrifice here. I think I bought like a 2000 Jeep Wrangler or something after that and drove it around, but that was a sacrifice that I was willing to make because I knew that's what I needed to do to have capital and to look pretty to the bank. But so we've used the SBA for all of our financing. We don't own any of our locations, so we just have leases, and I have a background in leasing, so that wasn't a huge step for us. But for those that have never franchised, that would probably be a big step. So my recommendation is like hire a broker to represent you. The landlord will pay their fee, and they'll be able to help you navigate that lease. And then I would just work through the SBA, work through your local bank to get an SBA loan. But man, there's so many different things like insurance and workers' comp and sales tax and taxes and just all these things you don't think about. And I remember
one second. I'm sorry, Chad. Let me break in for just a second. Before you get to those things, talk about, like, obviously the part of the story we know up to this point is you had this vacancy. You go to them, they say, hey, do you want to be a franchisee? What due diligence did you have to do besides like, oh, we have a willing person that wants to come in this spot? But how did you know, like, what steps did you take to make sure that you knew it was a good fit for you guys to take this on?
Yeah, sure. So we had obviously never had the product. So we went down, there's a store in Dallas, and this was like May or June of 20. So everybody, COVID was still really relevant. And I remember they had a tent in the back of the shop set up, so nobody's going inside. No, it was July, because I remember how hot it was. And it was a Sunday afternoon. We're like, hey, let's just try it. If it's horrible, well, there's a closed door, right? So we get out there, and there's literally like 15, 20 people standing waiting at like 2:00 on a Sunday in July. And one of the guys next to us, I was like, is this that good? Trying to get some intel. And he's like, well, I drive 40 minutes to get the beans. And I was like, wow, okay, that's a good sign. And the store, we knew that store had done really well. It was in Frisco. And then after that, we went to Austin. We met the family. So we were actually the first franchisees. And obviously this was our first franchise business that we'd done. So I'd love to tell you that we did all this due diligence. But we didn't. We just kind of went with our gut, which it turned out to be the right decision. It could have bit us, but again, we just went to the stores, we met the family, we called other franchisees and just kind of talked to them about it. And basically our question was like, hey, if you could do this again, would you do it? And their answer was yes. So we just kind of were led to believe that this is a good idea, and that's how it went.
If you've listened to our show for any length of time, you've heard us talk about infinite banking and how we were able to use that concept to create over $50,000 a month in passive income. But it's just not that easy to figure out, how does this all connect into my own personal system?
Stallion, that's why we created the passive income operating system, bro. It shows you how to turn active income into passive income. It makes all the steps come together. If you would like to get access to it as a podcast listener, we've never given this away in public before, go to what'swhatwallstreet.com/PIOS. There was nothing worse than walking into class when you're in school and the teacher saying, pop quiz day. Why? Because you were unprepared. Are you unprepared though for financial freedom?
Don't be. Find out how close you are by taking our 30-second quiz at wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/quiz.
So let me ask you this. You said you were the first franchisees. What you're talking about in Oklahoma?
No, for the brand.
Or period. Okay, so then what other franchisees were you talking to?
Sorry. We were talking to licensees.
So, okay. I didn't understand that. Sorry.
Yeah, my bad. So there were other licensees, and then they decided to get into the full franchise model. And so we knew it was going to be very similar to a licensee's experience.
Gotcha. Okay. So you're taking the tour, you're meeting the key people involved in the brand. You're at least looking at the licensing model and seeing how this could apply to the franchise model from a financial standpoint. Like what was your vision of what this could become in terms of the financial side? Were you just like, well, hey, in 5 years, we're going to start making some money? Or like, was there a vision of it? It's going to be a lot faster than that. What was your experience like in that side of things?
Yeah. And that's honestly, that's one of the hard things about franchises is they don't just right out of the gate tell you what you can expect. They'll just give you a bunch of averages. And I think for legal reasons, they don't give you those numbers. So I kind of had an idea what the store would do, and I tried to be super conservative. And this, again, this wasn't like, hey, let's go open 20 of these things. It was, hey, let's go open one. My wife, she had Lincoln and she was pregnant with Lyle at the time. So it was like, she was kind of ready to get out of the house a little bit. So it was like, this will be her baby. This will be something she can work on. And it exceeded our expectations. And you asked the question earlier of, what would you do differently? What I would do differently is if I went and got a franchise, I would try to sign a deal for at least 5 or maybe 4, because after you do one, you just learned so much. You would be silly not to do more. And then the more you open them, the more you're able to scale and put the right people in the right positions to where you don't have a job. If you have one, you basically created a job for yourself.
Yeah, so yeah, talk about that, because you just mentioned that your wife, who had 2 really small children at the time, was like, yeah, ready to get out of the house and run a business. Talk about what that time allotment looked like. What sort of time was she putting into the business? What sort of time were you putting into it?
Yeah, so I had still had my, 8 to 5 full-time job. So she was definitely running the stores and still is running the stores. But whenever that store opened, she was working, leading up to it, she was working tons of hours. And we would bring the pack and play up to the space and put them in the bathroom and let them take their naps in there and just kind of made it happen, But after the stores open, she'll work a lot for like a month. And then we really just lean on that manager. And so starting out, it was a lot. But after our 4th store in March, we hired to us what is our integrator, if you've read Rocket Fuel. So basically, his name is Jared, and we just lean on him heavily. And we have 70 employees now, and they all report to their manager, and the managers report to him, and then he reports to her. I'm not really in the day-to-day. I'm more in like the development side, where I sign new leases and I go get the financing, and I take care of the books and the payroll.
So the financial part, this is something that, we probably want to get in a little deeper, right? You said, hey, we didn't have a whole lot of examples to go by, but we did ask the licensee, which would be similar to a franchisee. Obviously, they have experience selling the product. And was there any financial discussions there other than, hey, would you do this again? Did you guys talk about money at all and kind of the profit model and the profit margins in this business?
Yeah, I tried not to do it like out of the gate. I didn't want to be the guy who was like, hey, how much money are you making? After we talked to them a few times, it was like, hey, can you give us an idea based on this location, what we should do in sales? And then can you kind of give us an idea of what net profit percentage or what we should expect after everybody's paid, franchise is paid? And they did share that with us.
And clearly that was enough to say, yeah, this is a great opportunity for my wife, Tori, to be able to do this, enjoy this, and it still be beneficial for our family.
Absolutely.
And all right, I want to dive into, you talked about scaling. And I think that's an amazing topic that we should always think about, is if we're going to do it once, the lessons we learn, then assuming that it's working, then there's no reason why we shouldn't scale. I've heard some of our, people in the real estate industry say, the dumbest mistake I make is buy one house. I need to buy 100, right? Like I've got to find a way to scale, because at scale, then you can do things that you couldn't do as one. So talk a little bit about scaling. Talk about adding extra stores with the franchise. Like, are you committing to what? What does that even look like?
Yeah, so when we opened the first one, it was like, hey, let's just open this one, and had no clue what we were doing. But one thing I kept telling myself, and this is for those that are like thinking about doing something like this, is like, look around you, wherever you're driving, there's hundreds of businesses. And I know I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I can figure it out, and they all figured it out. And so it's kind of like, you just got to take the risks and go for it. But for us, we want to get, our number right now is 20. So we want to get to 20 stores, and we might get to 10 and be like, hey, we're stopping at 10. We might get to 10 and be like, all right, let's do 100. We just don't know what that looks like yet, but we're hiring to get to that number. So we've hired our integrator. We have a full-time handyman. You just kind of learn like our biggest need right now is like handyman stuff, because we have all this equipment, stuff breaks all the time. And so we've hired that to alleviate. We're setting it up to where my wife and we can leave for a month and the thing spends like a top. That's just kind of our goal. And we know that we're a little top heavy, but we're willing to have larger expenses for our time and for it to be more passive.
So I love that, by the way. I keep telling Russ that he needs to leave for months, and it'll really help our business. But you talk about this hiring process, and it's just kind of like easy. Like, yeah, we just hire, we've scaled, we've got this integrator. For somebody who's never hired before, like you guys went from, hey, we're not entrepreneurs, to now we own, 5 stores and we want to continue to grow. Talk about, like, was it the franchise model that made that part easy, or was it just something that you've learned just on your own? Hiring, firing, that kind of thing it could be overwhelming to somebody that's never done it. Talk about that process and what you learned from that.
Yeah. Thankfully I don't do any of the hiring or firing. Tori and our integrator, Jarrett, they do most of that, but I pay payroll every week and I see those numbers. But it's kind of one of those things, like, if I can hire a handyman and pay him X amount of money and then know it's going to free me up to go and build other stores, that's just a way better use of my time, for me personally. And so it is a bit scary when you bring that new salary on, but then after you've paid him for a few months and you realize how much more freed up you are, you quickly realize the benefit of it. And honestly, thankfully, we've had really good luck with our employees. We don't have a ton of turnover. Obviously, there naturally is, because most of them are in high school or college. And so, but we haven't had a whole lot of turnover. But my wife, she handles that. And that's one of the hardest parts of the job, is letting someone go. It's not fun. So
I do want to talk a little bit about that, because I know that labor is the hardest part in this. You're in a service industry, right? So you're dealing with younger people, and talk a little bit about that. I think that is I know that you're not the one hiring and necessarily firing, but you're in those discussions. I guarantee you're in those discussions. Yeah. To me, I find it really interesting that you have scaled up to so many people and have been able to retain people. What are some of those things that you think that you guys are doing right that maybe some others have failed in? Because you see, like, I had a friend, they owned a kind of a service-based business, and that was always the biggest struggle they would talk about, is like, man, I feel like I'm having to work in the store so much because I can't keep people showing up to work on time, coming to work ever, and hiring enough people to count for the people who are leaving.
Yeah. Thankfully, like, retention's been great. One of the things we did earlier this year, there's an app called Motivosity, and basically it's a generosity app. And so it's like, we're trying to create a culture of generosity. And so every month, every employee gets $5, which it's not a lot, but it's kind of like a little social media where they can be like, hey, Joey, great job last night deck brushing, here's $1. Or, hey, Russ, thanks for helping me close, or thanks for helping me, unbox the milk, here's $1. And so, like, if I were to log on right now, there's literally at least 10 of those a day. And so it's just created a culture of gratitude. And so that's really what we're after. We don't want them to dread coming to work. So we don't do negativity, just try to keep it really positive. And then we have events like 3 times a year where we'll shut the stores down early, and we'll go to a baseball game, or we'll have a Christmas party, or I don't know. We just want it to be different. And so, yeah, that's kind of how we've approached it.
That's super cool. All right. I know we were running out of time, and I appreciate you jumping on here with us to share this. What would be one of those main benefits that you would say that you've enjoyed as a franchisee as compared to starting a business from scratch?
Ours was kind of a blend, because we were the franchisee, but they had the recipes. They told us what purchase of sales or point of sale system to use, what scheduling system to use. they just kind of, and they had a brand behind it. So when we opened, people knew what it was, and we instantly had a draw. And so to me, that's the biggest thing about a franchise is you're really buying the brand, and you're buying the audience. And so that's what I like about franchises. Now, I will say we wouldn't have done just a coffee franchise if it was just coffee and there was nothing that separated it. Ours has, we roast our beans a certain way, and we have moon milk, and no one else has moon milk. And so I would look for some kind of differential to other companies. What's going to separate you?
Yeah, that's super helpful to see. Like, if you've been in that boat and you've been thinking, am I an entrepreneur? And you're on that line, maybe just some of the things Chad's sharing about a franchise model. We've heard from people who sell franchises, right? And it's always going to be like, man, this is a great thing. It's hard for them not to say that. But to have your experience, Chad, I think is super valuable for people to see behind the curtain that experience. And now the fact that you're wanting to scale to such a big number just tells you the power of leveraging that franchise model. Before we go, I didn't want to miss the opportunity to talk about like your experience with Wealth Without Wall Street. What was it that brought you into the community? And we can talk a little bit more about like maybe what you've done so far and what you're kind of seeing the future look like.
So we go to Kauai. We have some friends in Kauai. It's like our favorite place. I was there last year, and I remember just like sitting on the deck on my phone, being like, okay, I know I want to build a house out here. It's not a matter of if, it's when. Like, how am I going to make this happen? And I came across infinite banking. So I started Googling it, and you all were in an article. I don't know what article it was, but I clicked on it. I booked a consultation, and Ernie took care of me. And so ever since then, I've been part of the Inner Circle Plus, and I'm not able to make every call, but just having access to the WhatsApp and being on the calls, and literally at any time of the day being able to submit a question, it's been awesome.
And we talk about this a lot in our community about your right next thing, right? We all have a thing that we need to be working on. The problem is that when we don't have focus toward one thing, we end up making no progress. And whenever you jump on a call with one of our coaches, they walk you through this process. So for you, what is that right next thing for you that you and Tori are working on right now?
Yeah, it's our taxes and our structure.
That's super cool to know that's the specific thing that you've got to be fixing. And it sounds like that makes sense if you own now 4 and about to open up your 5th store. Taxes are going to be a big issue, and making sure all the entities and everything are structured in a way to protect you. And as you get ready to build the house, by the way, have we talked about my room inside that house shed in Kauai?
No, we need to talk about that. I've been meaning to call you. Are you a fan of Kauai, Russ? I thought I saw that.
Well, we'll talk about that on another thing. Kauai, maybe not so much. I have some unfortunate events with Kauai that we've decided that maybe not Kauai. But either way, I know your wife is interior designer background, and we can talk about the color scheme of the room.
Okay, got it.
Man, hey,
Hawaii, Oklahoma is a beautiful place.
It is.
Oh man, I've really enjoyed having you on the show. Thank you so much for taking time. I mean, I think we're going to title this the Providential Entrepreneur, because just listening to the story of how God opened the door for you, and you just kept listening to him along the way, and just that this is something that you and your wife are doing that's bringing you closer together. That now your boys are growing up in this, and they're seeing kind of how mom and dad work together, how they do life together, and the opportunities that this will open up doors for them, and what will happen over their lives because of it. And I know we're all blessed to have heard the stories as well, man. Thank you for coming on and sharing it with us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right. Well, we appreciate you listening. Hope you had as much fun as we did listening to Chad. If you or someone has been thinking about starting a business, hating their job, and working kind of in the normal grind, and thinking, man, maybe there's a better opportunity, share this podcast with them. This is something that maybe would be a blessing to them. As always, have an amazing day.
This has been the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the show to break free of the Wall Street mindset and begin building wealth on your own terms in places you understand, so that your wealth will never run dry. See you next episode.